Yeah, my name's Eric Grice with Boast, and on behalf of Russ and I, we're excited to be a part of Vancouver Startup Week and hosting this guide to fundraising. So really quickly as an intro, here at Boast, we combine engineers and our software to help companies automate and streamline tax credits, primarily SHRED here in Canada. We also do US R&D in the States. We've been around since 2011. Every year we do 500 plus claims, 150 million in successful claims, and our platform makes sure that our clients can get more money faster and less audit risk. So any questions on SHRED, feel free to reach out to Russ and I. But the reason that we're here today, and the reason we really like being part of Vancouver Startup Week, is that outside of R&D tax, our mission at Boast is to help innovative companies become successful. And so we do that through our product, but you need more than just tax credits. So in 2014, Boast started traction with our friends at Launch Academy, and the vision was to provide actionable advice to help founders grow their businesses, via webinars, monthly dinners, and we would usually do an annual conference as well. That typically is in August. This year we had to go fully online. And with traction over the years, we've had leaders from Google, Uber, Shopify, LinkedIn, all join us to share growth secrets. It's nonprofit. All profits from traction events go to support the community. And so we really felt that traction and Vancouver Startup Week, we're all kind of on the same path, wanting to help companies and ourselves grow. And to talk about some of that, I'm excited to formally introduce my colleague, my friend Russ, and he's going to share some of his experience co-founding Limelight. They raised 10 million in funding from leading funds, and Russ, for 5 years, he ran sales, finance, and operations. We're very lucky now to have him. He runs our Eastern Canadian sales. He's awesome. Mentors at incubators, Techstars, Founder Institute, YSpace, and on. And so today he's going to share, how a successful startup managed its fundraising strategy, from beginning to Series A and onward. And without further ado, I'm happy to pass it to Russ.
Awesome. Yeah, appreciate that. Thanks, Eric. That's awesome. So we'll run through this, and I think we mentioned we'll do some Q&A at the end. But feel free to type questions into the chat at any point, and then we'll get to those at the end of the session. Also, I'll pop my my LinkedIn handle into here, just so you guys can connect in there. I got a bunch of other decks on my LinkedIn profile about sales process, pipeline velocity. So feel free to check that out if you're interested. Connect with me here. It should go into the chat at some point. Maybe. There we go. All right, connect with me there, and then we can you can see some of the other stuff I'm going. So let's get into it here. We're doing Entrepreneur's Guide to Fundraising. So as Eric mentioned, I'm Russ. I'm running the sales at Eastern Canada for Boast.ai. But prior to that, I was a co-founder of Limelight Platforms. We were in the marketing technology space. We were automating the workflow around experiential marketing digital. So our big customers were automotive. So think about auto shows, capturing leads and data at auto shows, ride and drive events, golf tournaments for big brands. It was a white labeled solution. We raised 10 million in multiple rounds. And I'll get into that. That's a little bit of the story of what I'm going to go through today. Prior to that, I spent 11 years in RBC Capital Markets. I was an institutional equity trader, traded stocks. I risked lots of money. I had like 5 screens. It was a really crazy job. We'd sell a whole bunch of stock, and if we traded stock, we'd high five our buddy and then go drink some beer at the end of the day. It was a really silly job. So I got out of that and I moved into Limelight with a buddy. He kind of convinced me to get over there. So I had a background in finance. So I was like, fundraising, I got this. I had no problem whatsoever. So this is kind of what I thought when I first got into it. I was like, fundraising, yeah, you go to an accelerator, you sell a little bit of your company for 5% for $100K, and you do a seed round, maybe you get 20%. you sell another 20%, 3 million, 15 val. And then you do a series A, you sell another 20%. I'm like, this is easy. Like, there's no big deal about it. And then I got into it and I was like, there were so many nuances of actually raising money for an early stage company. There were friends and family rounds, there were angel rounds, there was accelerators, incubators, VCs, growth equity. Boom, my mind was exploding. And then on top of that, the different ways to structure everything. There were safes, convertible debts, there was venture debt, there was equity, there was price rounds. Like, what was all these things? And they were all trying to come together, which was really tough. So after I left, I actually put this chart together, which was pretty cool. And this chart, it covers pretty much the life cycle of raising money from 2014 till 2018. So when we first started, we did a friends and family round. What our pre-money valuation was, how much we raised, what multiple that was, what our revenue was at that point, and then onward with that. What did we do on our next round? We went to an accelerator, then we did convertible debentures, and then we did shred financing, and then we did a seed round. So I'm going to walk through some of these and just how we went about it, our thought process around it, what I learned from pitching VCs. I probably pitched over 200 VCs and probably had 500 iterations of my pitch deck, because every time I got an ounce of feedback from them, I incorporated it into my deck, into what I was speaking, what I was saying, just to really drive home those points and really create a positive narrative around what I was building out. So, all right, so, but I'm gonna take a step back first, because I'm just gonna talk about fundraising. You know, everybody's like, oh, there's so much money out there and fundraising's easy. And this, I think the latest stats out was Q2 numbers for fundraising VC activity was the highest ever. That is the biggest skewed number ever. It was all follow-on investments. It was actually the early stage, and the people seeking funding for the first time was actually really low. It was follow-on investments. It was Series A. It was bigger deals that was skewing the information here. And no one ever talks about the bell curve, because you don't get clicks that way, right? So here's what else is happening. Everybody's launching startups at the same time. So you're competing for these dollars. There might be more funds out there to go be available to you, but everybody's competing for it, and it's really, really tough to get on it. So that is the biggest piece that we're working on here. So here's the interesting thing. When you actually look at and you break down the distribution of deals out there, 7 out of every 10 deals in 2018 were under $5 million, and a third of them were under $1 million. And I'm going to focus on the earlier side of that. So I like to think about your fundraising process is a bell curve. You got to think about it this way, because, you know, for everyone out there, there's going to be people who have extremely positive metrics. So if you're growing at 300% and you got like 100K in MRR, you're going to have a lot easier time fundraising. If you're growing at like 100% or, you know, 150% and you've got, you know, 50 or 40 in MRR, it's going to be tougher. So you're going to have to think a little bit harder about it. Your journey to fundraise is going to be a little more difficult, and you're going to have to work harder to get there. So think about it as a bell curve. Where do you lie in that spectrum? How do you line up against your peers in terms of your fundraising? So this is where fundraising strategy comes into aspect here, really understanding how to go to market with a fundraising strategy. The first thing you need to do to understand your fundraising strategy is, how do you put a valuation on your company? What's your company worth? What are you asking for? Why is it worth that? The reason why you need to do that is really about creating FOMO for your investors. They need to know what your drivers are of your valuation. So what are those key drivers that drive it? It could be your MRR and a multiple on your MRR. It could be your number of users if you're doing more B2C kind of solutions. What is the driver of your valuation, and how will that change as you hit certain milestones? What is that, those milestones? If you go from, what is your company worth if you're at 50K in MRR? What's your company worth if you're at 100K in MRR? How does that change? How are you going to get there? How long is it going to take? Because if an investor starts saying they're interested and, you know, they're looking at you at 50K in MRR, and they're looking at a valuation to impact there. If you go close a couple of deals and you have 100K in MRR, they can no longer invest at that valuation. And this is the thing, to drive that FOMO, drive that urgency, so they write those term sheets and actually give you some money. So you have to be able to figure out and actually defend what your valuation is. And then there's 2 ways to kind of think about this in terms of adjusting your milestones to match the cash you have on hand for when you're going to go out to market. Or the flip side of that is raising additional cash to hit those milestones, because those milestones are harder to hit than you actually thought. So thinking about those 2 ways when you're going through that whole process. Because obviously what we're trying to do, when you think about the metrics of it, you know, you have your milestone where you're getting a bump in your valuation. Once you raise money, your pre-money plus the amount of dollars you raise. So if your pre-money is $1 million you're worth, you raise 500,000, your post is 1.5, but you're spending that cash. So you need to rather figure out how to hit that next milestone to raise more money before you're out of, your cash is out of, down to a zero balance, but you're going to have to figure that out in terms of when your milestones are going to be and when you're going to go to market to raise more money. So in terms of valuations, like how do you come up with these valuations? So if you look at the chart, and I'll pull that chart up again a little bit later, but if you pull up that chart, we were hovering around the 7 times multiple for our MRR, our monthly recurring revenue. The rule of thumb is 6 to 9 times. Now, again, bell curve, you're going to get different multiples depending on a number of things. So what are those things? If you're an MRR business, the size of your market you're going after is going to impact the multiple you get. The smaller your addressable market, probably the smaller of multiple you're going to get. The bigger that addressable market or the more underserved it is, the bigger the opportunity. Your team, second-time founders, definitely get a multiple bump on first-time founders. They've been through it before. They've done it before. They know some of the pitfalls to avoid, or at least, and here's my best advice for early stage or first-time founders. It's not that there's these massive pitfalls you're going to fall into. It's more like death by 1,000 paper cuts. And if you can avoid 500 of those paper cuts, you're going to do a lot better. So that's why the team is important for that valuation that you're going to get. Your timing. What timing? Well, your timing is an interesting thing in terms of like when you're going to market. So Limelight was a marketing technology company. We were trying to raise money in 2014 and 2015. MarTech was not a popular sector in that time. MarTech was very big, like 2010 era. That's when you saw a lot of MarTech solutions out there, automating workflows around email, marketing solutions. We were doing it in 2014, 2015, and the market was already kind of worn out. There was already different funds that have already, spent a lot of money investing in early stage marketing technology companies. So our timing was a little bit off, which compressed our multiple a little bit. So where's your timing? Are you in blockchain? Are you in crypto right now? What's that hot sector? Or what is it that you're working on? Again, I touched on this sector. So what sector are you? Is it, a big moat around this? Is it a really popular sector right now? Is everybody trying to invest in fintech right now? Is everybody trying to disrupt this sector? That's also going to impact your multiple that you're going to get on it. And then your growth rate. This is your massive one. Your growth rate is so key to what that multiple is going to be and being able to figure that out. But that's going to be one of your main drivers of that valuation. And then logos. Logos are another interesting thing. And I also like to say logos because getting that proof of concept with some of these large companies is so key to even getting meeting with VCs. Here's a great example of a logo that got us a meeting. Me and my partner Jonah, when we were down pitching, we got invited to go to Sequoia's head office down in Silicon Valley. And we walked in and we were like shocked we even got a meeting with them. We had some logos on our pitch deck from people who were paying us. So we got a meeting with their head of enterprise B2B SaaS, and he came into our meeting room and we had a half hour booked out with him. And he came in and he said, guys, I don't have a full half hour for you, but I'm really interested in what you guys are doing. Can you go to page 6 on your deck? So we flipped to page 6 and he's like, tell me exactly what these companies are paying you for. And we told him exactly what you're paying for. And he was like, okay, thanks. That's what I thought. And he says, sorry, I got to go. I really appreciate you coming in. And he walked out. He knew his space so well and so good. Those logos even got us in the room because he wanted to make sure he wasn't missing something, that these companies were paying us on a recurring basis for something he hadn't thought about before. So those logos got us in the room. So taking some of those early deals with big logos to prove your concept, to prove out your solution, really helps your valuation and your story when you're going to fundraise in the market. And another thing to consider, valuations are not linear. Obviously, they're going to change over time. Your growth rate is going to move month over month, so you're going to have to figure out that side of it. So understanding your valuation, it's not linear when you're going to market, and being strategic about when you go and having the right formula and strategy in place when you're going to market to fundraise. All right. We're going to talk about a fundraising process. So my best way to describe your fundraising process is your outreach to VCs, angels, whatever it might be, is so similar to a sales process. You're going to have to know the the ICP and what drives that behavior. A VC's metrics are very different than an angel's metrics. A VC in Canada is different than VCs in Silicon Valley. They have totally different ideas of what's going to market and what big companies are. So understanding who those people and then getting a lot of them into your funnel. Your funnel process, you're gonna have to set up a drip campaign against those, keep them updated. And one of my best advice is always be prospecting when you get those meetings. If you meet with someone, you have to ask them the right questions to understand if they know somebody who has a thesis around what you're working on, if they could make introductions to other people who might be interested in that side. Always be prospecting even within your fundraising process and getting more leads to go back out to market and have it. Always have a FOMO story. So you need to have that fear of missing out story. So, it's very much back to like investing in stocks. When someone wants to buy it now, if I can get into this story at $1 million valuation, I'd rather buy into it now than at 2 million, and it's going to go up, right? So really talking about what your FOMO story is, fear of missing out. That is really key to your whole process. Another thing I like to claim, is term sheets get term sheets. That's also, it's known as like the Me Too kind of thing. When one person cares, other investors care. It's like, me too, I'll play too, because they don't want to be the first person to kind of admit to it or the first person to commit. But when they get comfortable that somebody else has done the due diligence, even though they don't know if they have, they are more likely to commit to a deal also. So term sheets get term sheets. So I like to explain it this way. If you guys have ever signed a term sheet before, there is a lockup period. So if you put your signature on the term sheet, you're not allowed to go shop a term sheet anymore. You're not going to make any friends by doing that. But before you sign that term sheet, someone's going to give you a term sheet, and say you are down the road with 2 or 3 different investors at that point. You can go to them and be like, hey, I'm about to sign a term sheet. You have 48 hours to act. Otherwise, I'm signing this term sheet, and then you will no longer have a chance to invest in this company. So term sheets get term sheets. You just have to address it properly and go through it. The last thing I'd like to say is always have a plan B. You need to have a plan B in your process, because things do not work out always as possible or always as planned. So have that plan B. How else are you going to get that funding? Are you going to use shred financing? Are there debt options that you can explore? Are you going to cut back on certain things? Whatever it might be, have a plan B, because until that cash hits your bank account, deals can fall apart. All right, so back onto this this funnel process. So you got 100 investors at the top of your funnel. You're gonna have to keep amazing records. So, I mean, I know people down road who use their CRMs to manage their investors. They create a different category. They keep it as investors. You don't need to do this in early stages. A G sheet is fine, but keep detailed records. Know every single thing about them. Again, it's back to know your client. If you're going to sell them, know their interests, their portfolio, what their theses are, everything you've talked about with them. Keep those records and make it personalized. Everybody talks in sales. Personalization wins when you're selling. You're selling these VCs a story. Personalization is still going to win. They're going to read your stories. They're going to read what you're selling more often if you're going to have a personalized message that goes out to them. Another key thing to do is manage your growth over your timeline. So great example of this. So say you're thinking, I'm going to go to market as soon as I hit 50,000 in MRR, and this is when I'm going to go to market. That's fantastic. But think about your pipeline behind that. If you stretched really hard, pushed 3 deals closed, and now you've got, really nothing in your pipeline behind that, that's not a good time to go fundraise, because your investors are going to, they're going to slow play you, and they're not going to write you the check right away. They're going to, open up your DD room. They're going to do some diligence. Hey, did you close any deals this month? You're going to give them a donut, and they're going to be like, no, that's not good enough. But if you have a full, healthy pipeline, when you're going out to market, you can at least deliver some growth over your fundraising timeline. It might take you 3 months. It might take you 4 months to close that deal. So you need to manage your growth over that timeline. Easier said than done, but just don't go. If you have an empty, ugly looking pipeline, do not go to market yet. Wait till your pipeline is healthier before you're going to go to market to go and raise that money. And then ask VCs the right questions. I think this is something that I think you need to learn to get more comfortable with. So, what stage is that VC? Typically in like $100 million fund, they might have 40 million for new investments and 60 million for follow-on investments. Ask them where they are in their fund cycle. Are they making any new investments? Are they only doing secondaries right now? how much they have left. Are you the first investment out of this fund? Are you the last investment out of this fund? All of these things are important for you to understand where that VC is, what they're doing, what their intentions are, so you're not wasting your time. And you're also understanding where they are and what their thought process is around what you're doing as well. So ask them the right questions when you're going through it. All right, so those are like my tips for fundraising. Now I'm going to go back to this slide here and just talk a little bit about some of the different, things that we did and the multiples we had. So again, here are my multiples that we raised at over our life cycle. Again, I talk about the sector. We were in MarTech. I know someone in the chat said that the 6 to 9 times seems low. This is what we were seeing, actual multiples based off of MRR in MarTech over this period. So this is actual, not theoretical. So yeah, you could have different ones easily, but this is what we were seeing. So just being able to base it off of something is really key for it. So interesting enough, like our friends and family round where we passed the hat around, went to our friends and family, we raised at a 12 multiple. I would say more than anything, just because, at your early stage, you're going to see a higher multiple, especially if you're, not even having revenue yet. Sometimes you just kind of have that baseline 1.5 million, which is kind of more where we were when we raised at that first stage. Then we went out, got some angel money, pre-money val. This is after we had a big bump in our MRR. So we did 3 million pre, raised 150 out of almost a 7.5 multiple. This was common. Then we went to an accelerator. Loved accelerators. Accelerators are great. We went to Acceleprise, which was in San Francisco. It's an enterprise B2B accelerator, but Ycom, Techstars, these accelerators are fantastic. Their programming is top notch. You come out ahead, skipping steps and understanding what you need to do to hit your goals. And the introductions you get to an angel and investor community are massive. And I would say we wouldn't have the success we had if we didn't go through this accelerator, because it introduced us to a bunch of people that really accelerated our path. And this is kind of the multiples that we got off of this one. So first thing I'd say based off of this in my early stages, clean up your cap table. And I remember circling the wagons with a bunch of different people that kept talking about cleaning up your cap table, but I didn't really understand what that was. Our company was spun out of an agency, so there was some IP and some of that. There were more people on the cap table than probably should be at early. So when they say clean up your cap table, what they're meaning is that make sure the people who are on the cap table are the people who are going to drive the value and create and lead the company in the future. They need to have a vested interest to work the extra hours, pay themselves less, care that much, have that drive to win, and you need to have that equity stake in the company to do it. So make sure your cap table reflects that for all of your key employees. Otherwise, your investors are going to call you out on it. Ways to fix that: you can issue additional shares to those people, issue a new class of shares. There's a bunch of different ways around it where you can get creative, but make sure your cap table is clean. Second thing is obviously get your IP in order. Make sure you have IP locked down for everybody. That means even employees who work for you have a separate IP agreement where they are making sure that the IP is property of the company. That is key for your whole process. You're going to go through DD, and your investors are going to want to make sure that that is locked up all across the board. So just get that in place from the get-go. All right, so after we got to our accelerator, we went to market offering some convertible debentures. So you'll see we had 2 different rounds of convertible debentures. One was a convertible into common shares. One was a convertible into preferred shares. This is when we got our first institutional investor. It was a VC fund from the Midwest who put some money in. And it was interesting because, as I said, there's a difference between Canadian and US investors. This fund was large enough where they gave us $100,000 on a convertible debenture just to have an option to invest in us in the future, which means that they were on our cap table, they had a look, and if we hit the right metrics, they would have led our Series A, no problem. But they put $100,000 into our company just to have an option of that. So think about that. They didn't provide any other value to us. They didn't make intros. They didn't do teach us certain things or go to market strategies. They really just wanted an option on the future because they liked where we were at that certain time, but they weren't there enough to really drive it forward in the future. So that was our first pref investor, instead of converting into common shares on a convertible debenture. I hear this question all the time. What's the difference between converts and safes? So technically, I don't think there's that much. The biggest thing I think with safes are a short form safe does not outline enough scenarios that could possibly happen. So a safe was developed by YCOM. The simplest safe that they developed was, for people who graduated YCOM. Everybody who grads YCOM raises an additional round. That's just kind of how it is. But convertible debentures will have the language around the conversion ratios if you don't hit certain milestones. So say you don't hit a qualifying funding round and you don't convert that debt into equity, it'll still have a mechanism to convert it into equity in the future without hitting those. It just has more scenarios that protect you. I especially like it with friends and family rounds because it outlines a lot of those outlier events, and it still says, how do I convert this debt to equity? Because if you don't have that in your safe, it's a really tough conversation to figure out what something should convert into after the fact instead of having it outlined in the first place. So, keep that in mind. That's the biggest difference, converts and safe. You can have a long form safe that will pretty much be the same as converts, but make sure it has those outlined in those different types of things. So keep that in mind. Here's some other pros and cons, obviously. Pros of it: it's fast, it's easy, it's cost effective. There's no change in your shareholders agreement with converts. They are living with your current shareholder agreement. They have no board seats. Their ownership's not defined. So these are the big things about converts that are more, really awesome to have. And here's a great strategy. So if you look at our fundraising strategy here, again, back to that valuation and what's my company worth. So we linked our monthly recurring revenue to our convert cap. So we said at 50K in MRR, we're at a 5 million cap, we're raising 250. And at 80K in MRR, we're moving our cap to 8 million and we're raising 250. So we're driving valuation. So if I go to my investors and be like, hey, I'm only raising 250 at 50 right now, here's my pipeline. I'm going to be at 80K in MRR in 3 months because here's how healthy my pipeline is. Invest now at 5 million, or if you wait 3 months, you're going to be investing at 8 million. Change the scenario, flip it on them, make them feel like they're going to miss out, so they want to raise and give you the money right now. So this is all about linking your MRR to your valuation, to understanding what you can raise at and how to create a little bit of FOMO, how to create a little bit of urgency around fundraising. And then the rule of thumb, obviously, generally they say if you're raising under $1 million, you can use converts and safes. But as soon as you kind of get more than $1 million on your table, you're going to want to do a price round to convert that debt into equity. And that's just the rule of thumb that's out there. All right. So after we did that, we were talking about plan B, and we were like, running tight on cash. So we did, everybody knows SHRED, scientific research, experimental development, where you get a ton of cash back from the government, up to 64% on your employees. You can finance that. It's fantastic. Go to market and try and finance against that. That brought cash flow forwards, which was effectively like a plan B in case something fell through, where we could go access this SHRED money at any time to help us keep going and keep fueling our growth as we were trying to increase our MRR and go raise more money. I see someone saying SHRED. Maxim, we'll send you some more information on it. It's a scientific research experimental development program. It's cash back from the government. It's on your income taxes when you file those. So definitely something you should be looking out for if you're doing any R&D. All right, so SHRED financing, covered that. Hey, we're talking about it here a little bit more. I got some slides on it even. So here's SHRED and a quick overview of it. I think the newest stat, I think it was about 3.5 billion and 20,000 companies in 2019. So a little bit smaller, but still a massive, massive program. By far the biggest program that's taken advantage of by companies. How does SHRED financing work? So SHRED financing, interesting. There's a ton of players out there who are going to try and invest with you. I've seen rates as low as 9%, but usually that's from like internal investors who will offer that. For firms out there, you're probably looking 12 to 15%. Some are even as high as 20% out there. I think that's on the steep side. You really don't have to go that high on it. But the way it works, it's you can do quarterly drawdowns against the expenses as you incur them throughout the year. So if you've got 5 developers and they're each making $500,000 after Q1, you can draw down against some of those incurred expenses. So just think about it that way. You can get that cash in Q1, you can get that cash in Q2, Q3, Q4 as it's coming through. And then once you get your refund from the government, you pay back your loan, but you're already into your next cycle at that point. So it's a great way to advance your cash flows, bring forward those, hire more people, hire more sales, more more dev talent, whatever it might be. It's a great way to bring those cash flows forward and help you grow. All right. After that, we did a seed equity. This was preferred shares at this point. So this is when we got our first real round. We raised $1.7 million at a 10 million val. It was about an 8 multiple at the time. We were doing 100K and 105 in MRR. So pretty decent metrics on that side. That's what we were raising at. So it was, the big benefits of doing a price round at that point is your valuation and your ownership are defined. A cap is not defining your valuation. It's defining the potential of where that convertible debenture will convert into, but it's not the actual valuation of your company. When you actually price around, you're going to define your valuation and the ownership for everybody. Once people have a vested interest like your VCs, you're going to have a lot more guidance from them, a lot more hands-on timing. They're going to have board seats generally, so they're going to be a little more vested in seeing your success. It's going to help you kind of put some of your processes together in terms of like dashboards, metrics, growth metrics, what you need to kind of hit and achieve to hit your next level and where you want to strive to hit. The cons of doing this, oh my God, rewriting your shareholders agreements. You think like there's the basic terms, but it just goes on and on and on around liquidity rights and follow on pro rata. Like it goes on and on about things. So like going through that, it's very time consuming and the legal costs can be quite expensive. They start to add up, definitely. So there's lots to negotiate, a lengthy DD process, have your data rooms ready and early. If you're not organized, if you're an early stage company and you're not organized with your documents, make sure you're on that now, because no one's investing in you without seeing a complete data room. They need to see everything lined up. Otherwise, it's too risky for them. So make sure you have all that in place. All right, I skipped another one. We did another shred financing round because why wouldn't you do one? Just bring your money forward again. And then we kind of went through a period where we had some low growth. So we needed to extend our runway. Seed plus, seed plus plus, seed plus 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 now. We're seeing a bunch of different ones out there. We did a seed plus, we had to give warrants on that. So if you actually think about this in terms of our valuation, this was almost like a flat round, just because our revenue growth had stalled a little bit. Valuations aren't linear, they move all over the place, right? So our revenue growth had stalled, it was a little bit further on. So let's think about the math here, 10 million plus 1.7. So pre plus what you raise equals your post, 11.7. So almost a year later, we raised at a flat round. So 11.7 was our pre. We raised 600 there, but we had to give warrants on this. So what are warrants? Warrants are long dated options where the investor can buy more equity at a discount. The expiry on these could be 5, 10 years. Warrants can be very long dated, and it gives them a chance to buy more equity at a cheap price. So we had to throw in some warrants to get this deal done. Because we had a big deal in the pipeline that was just taking longer to close than we wanted. I think I got a slide on this. Let's go check it out. Yeah, options. Obviously, if you guys haven't launched your ESOP yet, something you definitely should be starting to look at. An ESOP is a fantastic tool, employee stock option plan. It's great for hiring new people. If you got this, big shot person who, wants a big salary, you might be able to give them 1% in options and negotiate their salary down. It helps you get on a level because your employee has more upside in the company going forward. So ESOPs are great for you to help acquire and retain great talent for your company. ESOPs are generally on your fully diluted float. So that means all equity converted. That's what your ESOP will be based off of. You're typically asked to top it up every time you fundraise. You don't have to, but you kind of, that's kind of the thought process around it, because you're going to have big hires that you have to do after every fundraise. The general terms on ESOPs, 10-year expiry, 3-year cliff, 3-year full vest, 1-year cliff. Nothing vests for 1 year, 3 years to all of it, and then 10 years to expire and actually execute on them. Warrants, kind of just covered this before, so I'll keep jumping along here. Government debt. This was the first time we were able to get government debt. Now, this landscape has changed considerably. So we're at 120 in MRR, and that was the first time we were able to access debt. It was 13% debt. We got $500,000. I know there are lenders out there who play earlier, lighter capitals one who will, if your growth rate's right, they'll fund you with 50K in MRR now. So this market is completely changed upside down. There's a lot more players in it. So something to keep in mind. And I got a little sheet after I can share with you. So obviously you're going to want to do the 9 non-dilutive financing options, which would be debt, government grants, government debt, whatever it might be. You're not giving up any equity. You're not giving up board seats. Almost nobody's asking for personal guarantees anymore, which is the way it should be. It's going to extend your runway before an equity round. One of the best things of doing, extending your runway here is, so think about that valuation and how that changes. If you go from 100K in MRR, if you do $1 million debt deal, even if your interest rate's 20% on your debt, if you go from 100K in MRR to 200K in MRR and your valuation doubles over that period, you're now selling that much less equity in your company. So your cost of capital is way cheaper paying 20% interest than the dilution on your company by not extending that runway. So you got to think about it from a big picture standpoint. So 20% isn't expensive when your growth rates are that high and you can turn it into it and grow that quickly. I'm seeing just a quick question here. Monthly recurring revenue. So that's your month. Yeah, there you go. Eric's on it. Nice. All right, so what are the types of non-dilutive financing options? These are the categories that they're kind of bucketed to: secured debt, which is bank debt, venture debt, revenue financing, shred financing, government debt, and then other government grants. Canada is fantastic for government grants, so make sure you're all over this and taking advantage of all the programs there are out there. Secured debt. So this is your top grade. This is like when you're borrowing from the bank. So these are like prime plus interest rates. So usually like 5 to 9%. Probably even cheaper now, considering the Fed's at like 0. So it's probably even a little bit cheaper. You're probably looking at like 4 to 7% right now. Typically, they're not going to look at you until you got 100K in MRR, and then they might do a 4 to 7 times multiple on that as a line of credit. So meaning you might get, if you have 100K in MRR, you might be able to get a $400,000 to $700,000 line of credit. That's pretty much what that means. They're going to have to put a GSA in place. Turnaround times 2 to 4 weeks, probably not. It's probably a little bit longer than that. They like to say that, but it's not really true. So here's the things that you got to watch out for, though. Like the red flags for people lending to you. B2B is a little bit riskier because churn rates are notoriously higher. B2C churn rates are higher. B2B, you see a little more stickiness, so especially if you get into the enterprise market. That's what they really like to get into. Client concentration, if 85% of your revenue is coming from a few clients, that's a big red flag. If your gross margins aren't, north of 65%, it's not SaaS anymore. They're a little bit more worried. There's less money to pay back that interest. And if your churn rates are really high, those are some other big ones that are flags for them. The one thing that they do love is if you're backed by institutional capital. So what does that mean? If you have an institutional investor on your cap table, they're more likely to give you debt. Why? Because the only goal of the debt provider is to make interest plus principal. So as long as you can pay those interest payments and pay back that principal at the end of the day, they don't really care about anything else. They're just trying to maintain that. If you have an institutional investor on your cap table, if things start to go sour, chances are that VC will step up. They'll do a down round. They will do a really low down round to take over the company to try and liquidate the funds at the end of the day. There is a tangible value of the IP that's within the company, and they are more likely to get their money back. So if it's backed by institutional capital, you're going to have more chance to get debt. All right, venture debt is an operating line. It is a little more expensive, well, a lot more expensive. We're talking like 15, 20, I've seen 25% before, plus warrants. So venture debt guys want warrants on top of that. It's typically in the same range, 100K in MRR. It's pretty much the big difference about that is they're going to be subordinate. So they're going to be second, third in terms of ranking to get that principal back if you were in the event of a liquidity situation. So they'll go subordinate on it. And they'll also, their metrics for actually funding you will be a little bit more loose. So they'll take a little bit more risk on your gross margins, on your client concentration, on your churn, on your, on some of the other things. So this is, again, what the venture debt side is looking like. Revenue financing is an interesting an interesting metric where they'll actually lend against your revenue that you currently have. So say you have $1 million in revenue, they might charge you a royalty on your current revenue. They want to see you have at least 100K in MRR out there before they'll actually start to do it. It's typically around 3 times the cost of capital. And what I mean by 3 times the cost of capital, if you borrowed $1 million, they want to make their $1 million back. It's a one-time buyout. So you got to pay $1 million to buy that back out. So that's $2 million. And then they want to make them out $1 million on their royalty. So a $1 million loan will cost $3 million. That's the 3 times the cost of capital, which sounds expensive again. But if your valuation doubles over that 1 year period, that cost of capital is well worth it, spending that, that 3 time cost of capital versus what some of the other ones. So here's like kind of the metrics on that in terms of venture capital. So we're taking cost of capital for venture capital is usually 10 times plus. Like it could be even higher depending on how fast your growth rate is. Private equity is 3 times. Revenue financing averaging 3 times. Venture debt's 15 to 25%, and then senior debt's 4 to 8%. So just kind of putting it all into a bucket so you can see the cost of capital across the spectrum here. All right. How are we doing on timing? Pretty good. All right, government debt. This is by far my favorite one. FedDev. I don't know if FedDev exists out in BC, but there's one in Ontario. I'm in Ontario, but we actually at Boast, we have a fundraising guide for government grants. So if you guys go onto our website, or Eric can put a link in the chat also, it has a link to the most popular government programs in BC. Take a look at that. These are what a lot of the companies are taking advantage of. So make sure you're taking advantage of those as well. Shred, by far the biggest. IRAP, second biggest. Those are the 2 go-tos that you definitely want to get in front of. That's where you're going to get a lot of your money back. Here's like bucketing the different providers out here. So venture debt, Espresso, Firepower Capital, if you guys are out there looking for it. Revenue financing, you got Flow Capital, Tamaya, Mezzanine, venture debt. You got BDC, SVB, Comerica. They're all players in that space. Shred financing, Easily, Venbridge. Senior debt, this is like your bank. So Roynet Capital is really just Scotiabank. RBC, the KBI group, they're fantastic. CIBC and Innovation Banking, they bought Wellington West or Wellington Financial. The BMO group. And then EDC is a massive one you want to bring to the table. If you're exporting into the US at all, you definitely want to pay attention to EDC, bring them to the table. They do a lot of loan guarantees. So they take on the risk, which helps lowers your cost of capital from the banks if EDC is at the table. So bring EDC to the table if you're ever talking to the banks. All right. As we got further down, we did a Series A. I like to call it a Canadian A. It was 4.7 million on 15 pre. So we were almost at a 20 million post val. Our multiple shrunk a little bit. We got compressed down to about 7 times multiple. Our MRR was up at 180. So things were looking pretty good, and that was a preferred, and it was actually a preferred Series 2. So it was a different series, and that just had to do with the liquidity preference of when they could convert, or if there's a liquidity event, who got money out first. So cap tables start to get a little more complicated as you get further down the road here. All right, boom. I think that's it for now. I'm going to stop at this point, and let's jump into some Q&A. We'll go from there. And awesome.
Thanks, Russ. I saw there's a couple questions. I'll just scroll back around the MRR that might be quick, but I saw Martin and Maxim had questions. One on how you evidence the MRR, was it bank account statements? And Martin was asking how many months of actual sales do you need to justify the MRR for the valuation?
Very good question. So I would say there's a little bit of creative accounting. So you need assumptions on everything you're doing. So my rule of thumb was my MRR was when I had a commitment from a client for a minimum of 3 months with the expectation of it going further into the future, I would classify it as MRR. And that was my rule that I used for everything. I think about anything you do within, like, if you're calculating your CAC, your LTV, your ARPU, whatever you're calculating, have assumptions, write your assumptions down, and then stick with it. You can't be wishy-washy on what is and what isn't. So just have a rule of thumb. I would say 3 months of, revenue recurring is maybe on the lower side. Like, it's pretty aggressive, but that's how I did it. And it was completely fine to have my MRR that way. The due diligence really would come down to them looking at the contracts. And if all your contracts are in your data room, they would look into like, what are the big contracts? Generally, they're going to look at the big ones. So if you have, a concentration of larger contracts, they're going to make sure you see those. And the smaller MRR deals, they might not even look at it. So, but that's generally your MRR and how to defend against it.
Nice. And I also saw, and I'm not sure if you can speak this because I know it's a slightly different, it's slightly industry specific, but Rodrigo had a question around if there's any advice for startup in the health space, right, where there's a lot of regulatory costs, and how do you even maybe start, or the chicken and the egg, as his comment is there. I don't know if you had any insight there or.
Yeah, I mean, healthcare is always a lot more difficult. I mean, with healthcare and some of that stuff, yeah, if you're doing biotech, obviously patents are going to be what's going to drive a lot of your valuation. What is the future value of this patent, the addressable market, the tangible market you're going after? How many years are left on it? What is your developmental costs on it? A lot of this will come from, typically you'll have healthcare VCs that invest in that space who are very good at figuring that out. You don't usually have a lot of generalist VCs who are going to spray all over the market. They're going to have very defined funds that go after certain sectors. So I'd say that's how you kind of define the valuation for some of those other sectors, but just come up with a formula. Again, it's an assumption. Everything you're doing at an early stage company is a hypothesis, and you're testing against that hypothesis. So your hypothesis is, this is my model of what it's worth, and go talk to some VCs to prove it right or wrong. That's kind of how it works. Like if you were to draw up one of those dashboards that I have with all the different funding and the multiples, what would yours look like if you were to do that exercise, and then work backwards from that?
Perfect. And I saw Stephanie and Rand here had questions around shred lenders in Canada, right? And I think the ones that you've listed there, Stephanie, definitely, right? Easily, Venbridge, OKR, Espresso. Very shortly, we're at both. We we're doing a bit of a soft launch. We have some options for financing as well, so feel free to reach out to Russ or myself, and we can look at that. I'm trying to think. Russ, out of those are kind of the top four I usually see. Are there any other shred financiers that you can think of? And
yeah, so
sorry, and really quickly, around here with the shred amount of 80K, there are options. Reach out to Russ or I after. As Russ was saying, sometimes as small as kind of 50K, there's options to finance the shred. But sorry, Russ, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, so a lot of them, like Espresso, they've gone up market. So they're trying to do more venture debt deals. They're trying to lend $5-10 million at a time. But a lot of these guys might look at a holistic package of what you're doing. So they might say, hey, you've got shred, you've got revenue. I will lend you against both of those with this type of line of credit that's secured against your revenue and secured against your shred. So some companies do that as they go up market. If you're looking for purely a shred loan, that's when you really get to the specialized stuff. Talk to Eric after if you're looking at that to figure out if you qualify, and we might be able to help you on that front. But yeah, some of them are kind of like a bigger picture, like BDC might do it as part of their debt package, but they do not do shred financing on their own.
Exactly. Perfect. Was there any other questions there in the chat? Trying to think if I have any questions for you, Russ. Should have tried to think of some hard ones to stump you.
All good.
Put you on your back.
No, all good. I see you put the Western Canada fundraising guide in the chat, which is fantastic. So take a look at that. It's got a bunch of great programs that are available. I always think of grants in terms of like, you got to layer them on. Generally, a lot of the formats for your grants, like especially employment grants, it's like a template, and it's roughly the same questions they ask on each one of them. But if you can take advantage of like 5 or 6 employment grants, you can get $100,000 for employees, 15K at a pop. Or there used to be travel ones. I guess those are all gone right now, but maybe that will get revived at some point. But take advantage of anything you can. And my experience with IRAP and going through that, work on there's a youth employment one, which I think is 40 or 50K. They're more likely to give that out first than the big grants. So ask for that. If they're not giving you the other one, just try and build a relationship with them, because IREPs just they're trying not to lose their money. They want to make sure you're going to be a going concern in the future. So they're trying to minimize their risk profile. They want to see your dollars that you get from them grow jobs and continue to grow the company to help fuel it in the future. So that's kind of what their metrics are.
And with the grants as well, I noticed one resource that's definitely I would recommend for anyone local here in Vancouver is Granted. I think I saw there on the chat there and the people. They can definitely help you navigate. We've got a number of clients that they help navigate the grant space. So, Stephanie and her team, that's another good resource if you're looking for government grants. It can definitely help navigate. And it looks like I see a question here from Stephanie. You see that, Russ? Around.
Yeah. The valuations that were in there were actual. So they were MRR, so monthly recurring revenue times 12 divided by the valuation to give us the multiple. So you can do, so it's like cash flows are tough. Just at these early stages to do models against it. So I think you can do some cash flow modeling if you want, but usually it's just, that multiple on that MRR. On
Peter
forecasting.
There,
yeah. So just on forecasting, I guess my biggest thing that I've seen with forecasting is I'm going to circle back to the whole thesis of who are you presenting it to. Angel investors want to see different forecasts from Sequoia in Silicon Valley. Angel investors are like, how are you going to get acquired in 2-3 years? And Sequoia is like, how are you going to be $1 billion company? So if you're forecasting, you got this forecast and you're like, we're going to be break even in 3 years. If you sent that to Sequoia, they'd be like, what the hell are you doing? You should be talking about when you're raising your next round. You just raised a seed round. Tell me when you need to raise your A round. How are you spending your money to raise your A round? And then when you're raising your B round, and then when are you IPOing? So your models changed. Like I had different models depending on who I was sending it to, because I knew the ICP of that person, and I would send a model that reflected what I thought their outcomes, or what conversations I had with them about what I think their outcomes want to be. And I would send them that model based off of it.
And in terms of accelerators, I think, there's, Russ, maybe I'll see if you have any recommendations, but there's a ton of good, especially here in BC, here in Vancouver. There's kind of regional specific accelerators. BC Tech is a great place to start, right? Obviously, Launch Academy that we partner with. We could kind of go on, but talk to accelerators, talk to a number of them, and find the right fit. Russ, I don't know if your experience had any specific notes, or is it more find the one that fits for you? Or
well, yeah, I think that's exactly it. Like Techstars, they have different locations, cater to different sectors. So find the one that fits what you're doing and apply to that one. Some of them are generalist, but the big ones, the big ones off the top of my head, YC, Techstars, and Acceleprise are the 3 biggest ones that I know of off the top that actually give you money to join them. So those are the 3 popular ones, but there's a ton. Plug and Play is another one. There's a bunch of other ones as well. I'm sure the list is probably about 20 long.
I was gonna say we could keep going, and there's I don't want to leave anyone out. But definitely a good place to start.
Right on. Well, we're almost at the top of the hour. I don't see any other questions in here. If you guys didn't connect with me on LinkedIn, I got a pitch deck guide in there. So how to build a pitch deck. I've got SaaS sales playbook and a velocity playbook in there. Check out those as well. You can get them off my LinkedIn profile. Connect with me there. You got Eric on here also, who's in Vancouver for the Bose team. I'm in the Toronto team. So if you need any advice on Shred or Shred financing, talk to this guy, Eric. He's your man. What else do we got?
Yeah, go check out our website. Feel free to check out launch and our traction sessions. We do traction growth sessions, usually 1 or 2 a week. They're on the Traction Conference website, on launch, and on ours. We're happy to share information.